Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is going to be a basic video on basic unit testing in Python and Ruby. Okay, just so that way you can see, well, let's just discuss what is a unit test and then kind of go from there. So like there's different types of testing, and the purpose of testing is not necessarily for you, because to be able to write a test you kind of need to understand what you're trying to do. Because the idea is to write a test to test that your code does what you intended to do by automating the things you would do to test it. So in like unit testing, you're testing that particular functions have the end result that you want. So if I have a function that adds two numbers together and I pass it 1 and 1, it should return 2. So I'm saying this should be true if this function is correct. Okay, and then you would write a similar test for every possibility, or as many possibilities as you can. The idea, you want to test one that the function does what it's supposed to do, but you also want to test it in several scenarios. The idea is you want to see, like, in sort of weird scenarios, how does the function handle itself? Does it work when it's supposed to work? Does it not work when it's not supposed to work? So sometimes the fact that it breaks is the right answer, in the sense that, like, hey, if I pass a number and a string, it should give me something that's not the result of adding the two numbers if they were both numbers, if that's what you intend. So the idea is you have to kind of have an idea of, like, what are you building and what do you intend for it to do in different situations, and then you build tests that do that. So that's a unit test. Tests pieces. Now, then there's end-to-end testing. End-to-end testing is when you kind of test the whole process. So the idea is, like, maybe you have like 10 functions that all work together for a larger process. I would maybe first write a unit test testing each of them individually. Then an end-to-end test would test how the process goes from beginning to end, that after the end of my application, at the end of a particular process, does all the things work out? Okay, so basically, bottom line is a piece. Are you testing the whole or a piece? End-to-end testing tends to be a little bit more work, like, because you're kind of automating, like, usage of the DOM and stuff like that, because you're testing sort of like how you're testing how it all works together. Cool. So we're going to focus mainly on unit testing, because that's the best way to start. Just get used to writing tests for, and where tests really become useful is not when you necessarily initially write the function, because again, you know, you have to kind of know what you're building or what you built to write the test. But in the future, people might edit the function, like, especially if you're working on a team, people might edit the function. People might edit one function in a process. So the function might still do what it's supposed to do individually, but it might, because you do it differently, it might break the process. So the unit test may pass, but the end-to-end testing may fail. And vice versa. The process may succeed, but the function doesn't do it the way it was supposed to be done, so the unit test still fails, even though the end-to-end test passes. The idea is you kind of want everything to be done a certain way, and testing kind of forces things to conform. And usually what you would do is you'd run your own tests, or you'd have QA engineers who test software and come back to you with notes. Nowadays you have something called continuous integration, where you, using things like GitHub Actions and Jenkins and other tools, what you can do is you can automate what happens when certain events occur, such as pushing code to a branch, or doing a pull request on GitHub from a branch, or deploying to Heroku. All these things can be events that trigger, like, tests to run, and those tests would then run, and if not successful, prevent the event from happening. So you won't be able to push your code because you didn't pass the test. You won't be able to pull that branch because you didn't pass the test. This is awesome, because it makes it where you don't have to have someone have to spend their time running the tests or reviewing your code to safely merge, push code. So it makes it where the team can kind of just work and not necessarily lose speed, because you're waiting for tech lead to become available to review your code. So with that, let's just kind of write some basic tests. So first we'll do Python. I'm opening that folder already in the wrong place. Okay. Okay, I'm going to open up a folder. We'll call this the Python testing folder. And there's a lot of testing libraries for every language. So this is just, I'm only going to go over one for each. Okay, so I'm going to open up my terminal here. I'm going to create a virtual environment because I like, you want to always isolate your stuff inside Python. So I am going to do Python -m because I'm using a module. Which module? The virtual environment module. And we'll just call it my virtual environment. Okay, so that's going to create the virtual environment. There it is, my v. Now I'm going to activate that virtual environment. So I'm going to do source because I'm running some binary slash, or we'll say dot slash my v. Then there's a folder called bin, which stands for binary. And then there's a binary called activate that we want to run. And that activates the virtual environment. So we see that there. Yay, my v. Cool. Okay, so we did that. And then, yeah. Okay, so now I want to install Pytest. npm install Pytest, which is a Python testing library. Oops, did I do that? Did I do npm install? I didn't do npm install. And it actually installed the package. Interesting. No, I meant to do pip install. You can tell I just woke up. Pip install, because it's Python, not JavaScript. Pip install Pytest. Let me delete all the node stuff. So let's delete node modules. Let's delete package log, package JSON. That's all Python stuff. There we go. Cool. Now in this folder, I'm going to touch a file called funcs. Okay, and then I'm going to touch, anyway, that should be called funcs.py. Rename .py. And then I'm going to create a new file called touch test funcs. Just going to look for files with that sort of that test underscore prefix. So I'm testing funcs. Okay, so I'm going to write a function. So I'll say def add 1 equal, no, not JavaScript, return x plus 1. Okay, so there's the function. Okay, all this function does is take a number and then return that number plus 1. That's what it does. So then here I can import that function. So I'll say import funcs. It'll complain, but whatever. VS Code. Why is it running? Okay, let me just exit. There we go. Funcs. Okay, so I've imported the funcs file. And so basically now what I do is I define a test. So define a function. We'll say define test add 1. And then I'm just going to assert something. Assert just means, and again, this function can be as complicated as I want. The point is at the end, you test something that should be true after the function. So the function should return a value or something. There's other ways to test other things as you get deeper into the Pytest library, but in the beginning, it's always make sure like the function returns something if it's successful that is testable. So I want to assert that funcs.add1, since I just imported the file. So I'm going to pass the number 1, so technically 1 plus 1 should equal 2. Okay, so essentially I'm saying this must be true for this test to pass, that funcs.add1, the function that from the funcs file, if it's past the 1. Now if I run pytest in this directory, it's going to look for any test files and just run them. So pytest. Oh, I'm in the wrong folder. There we go. Pytest. See, the other folder didn't have my virtual environment running. Looking at all these terminals. Okay. Pytest. And you see one test passed. It doesn't give you any other output because you passed, so like who cares? Now if I change this to like 3 in the sense that add 1 should equal 2, so it's not going to equal 3, so I wrote my test wrong. Okay, but just to purposely show you what happens when there's an error. See, I get this error and I say, hey, like 2 does not equal 3. Okay, because that's what I asserted. I said, hey, I'm testing add 1, and I asserted that 2 equals 3, and that's not true, so the test failed. Okay, because technically the result of this is 2. That's why it's showing me 2 equals 3. Because basically all it's doing is assessing the result of the expression. So, yeah. Again, to write the test correctly, we like that. Now let's see here, with the test correctly, I could write the function wrong. Okay, and then if I do that, x plus 2, test still fails. Okay, so it just allows me to catch, like, hey, there was a modification to a function and something went awry. You can bring in other Python libraries and use them to simulate things. Like I brought in requests to simulate requests to a particular API, and then asserted whether the return values were what I expected them to be. Whether they were an array, whether it created the thing that I expected to be created. So that's cool. Okay, so moving on. So I want to shut off this virtual environment, and the way we do that is we just type in the word deactivate, and see, now it's gone away. Okay. Now I'm going to go back up to the top. We're going to create a folder for Ruby, so we're going to say make dir Ruby. And here, like again, Ruby doesn't necessarily, you don't have to like isolate environments, you just create those gem files. So I can just cd into this Ruby folder. I already have a library called Minitest installed, but technically if you want to install it, would be gem install Minitest. Okay, I'll just like see, it's already installed. So so once Minitest is installed, you can then write tests. So once again, I will touch a couple files. We'll touch funcs.rb and test funcs.rb. Okay. Yay. Take a sip of coffee. I'll close up the Python folder, open up the Ruby folder. Once again, we'll write up a function. So def add 1 x, and then it's going to be return x plus 1. And again, with Ruby, like it'll automatically return whatever the last line is in the function. So that's fine. And there we go. We wrote the same function. So now if I want to write the same function, first I'm going to require Minitest / auto run, because that's what it says in the documentation. Then I'm going to do a require relative, because I want to require funcs, so I'm going to require funcs. There you go. I'm bringing in that local file. So require relative. So this require is going to bring me in a library. Require relative will look for a file relative to where I'm at right now, and I'm importing it. And then what you do is you create a new class. So I'm going to create a new class, test funcs, which is going to inherit from Minitest test. Okay, so Minitest has this method called test that generates the class that you need, that we're going to be inheriting from. And then after that, we just define a test. Def test funcs. Okay, VS Code. Def test funcs. When something tries to save you time but doesn't, you know what I mean? Let's escape. Def test funcs, and then basically we want to assert again. So it's the same story. I want to assert that add 1 being passed 1 equals 2. Okay, and then end the class. Now in this case, I don't run a particular command. I just run the file. So like Minitest is built to be sort of very simple intertest for very simple tests. There's another library, rfspec, that a lot of people use for Ruby testing. I haven't used that one, but essentially, like here I go. I want to go to Ruby test underscore funcs. Okay, and then we just get this like here. So it ran one test. That test had of all those tests, there was one assertion, so there was one check in those tests, and none of those assertions failed. There were 0 errors that occurred and 0 skips. Okay, so basically that is sort of the output. This is kind of the desired output. You want there to be 0 failures or errors. Now again, you can have multiple assertions. So I can then assert, hey, if I add 1 and I add 0 to it, does that equal 1? And then I can add one that's wrong, or one that should just break. Assert, if I added the number 1, it should probably throw an error, but we'll see what happens. Add 1 to 1 in JavaScript, it would just give you back 11. Let's see if actually Ruby does that. Let's see, give me back the string of 11. Okay. Okay, so I have 1 error. Okay, which is going to be that last one. And let's see here. So no implicit conversion of integer to string, because Ruby doesn't play that way. And that's all it tells you. Okay. It doesn't kind of give you like sort of like the expression like it does in Pytest, but you can kind of see that. Okay, that was the problem. So in that case, like so that just runs an error. That's why I didn't say a failure, because the assertion didn't fail. The running of the function errored before the assertion had a chance to fail. So that was that. Okay, so we'll say 3, 4. Okay, let's see, it was one test that had 3 assertions, and none of them failed. Okay, and the idea is you can just like test all sorts of like random scenarios. And you know what? We're making good on time, so let's do a bonus. Let's also just do a quick show you how to do basic JavaScript testing with the actual built-in console object. Okay, so basically, yeah, let's do that. So I'm gonna CD back up over here, CD, and then I will make a JS file, CD into the JS folder, and then I will touch a funcs.js, and I will touch a test funcs.js. Okay, so now we go back to the JS folder and we create the same function. So we'll just say const add 1 equals x plus 1. There we go. Okay, nice, short and sweet. Okay, and then we're going to say module dot exports equals add 1. We're just going to export this one function. Okie dokie. And then I'm going to bring in this thing, require dot slash funcs, and I gotta bring that into something, so it'll be const add 1 equals, so we bring it back into add 1, and then we can do something like this, console.assert. Okay, and then what we do is we pass in an assertion, except here you're just passing in a Boolean expression. It's either true or it's false, and then it gives you a message if it fails. So we'll say add 1 equals 2, so that's the Boolean expression, and if it fails, we'll say it didn't work. Otherwise, it just skips it. Okay, so then I can just do this, do this, do this. So 2, 3. So 3 plus 1 should equal 4. And we'll say that 5 plus 1 should equal 6, but we're going to make the test fail So we'll just say 1, just because I want that to fail so you can see what happens. And then what you do is you're going to run node test funcs.js, because you're going to run that, and then you see the result of all the asserts. Okay, assertion failed, it didn't work. Okay, now in this case that isn't quite as helpful. There are libraries again that are a little bit more robust as far as the output they give you in JavaScript. Okay, you know, and again, this is like just some basic built-in ability to assert and do some basic tests in JavaScript, and it's just not necessarily a bad way to just kind of try it out. Okay, ideally, I guess here you'd really say, hey, you know, did not add up to 2, did not add up to 3, did not add up to 4, something, a much more useful message. Did not add up to 1. So now if I run that again, we see like the one that we intended to fail is the one that failed, and the ones that succeeded, well, they did not did not show a message because they succeeded. So this is not a bad thing. This level of kind of testing is not necessarily a bad thing to build into your functions, especially when you're developing the functions, to just have like assertions within your test. So you go even like sub-unit testing. And like Python and Ruby do have like commands like this built into them. I was just showing you this as sort of a quick bonus, but I'm gonna leave it at that. So here's some basics of testing in Python and Ruby with a bonus JavaScript piece. I'll see you all later. Have a great day and enjoy.